This is the Open Floor NBA podcast where we talk about the league and all the big stories going on in it. Joining me, as she does every week, from Fox Sports 1, Monumental Sports Network, All the Smoke, and of course this podcast every single week, the great Rachel Nichols. And Rachel, I feel like we have to actually start. We usually have a little fun at the start of the show.
Yeah.
But like right before we started recording,
this is crazy.
We had some crazy NBA news, some crazy breaking news, and all courtesy of the Wall Street Journal, which I'll read the top line of the story. Federal prosecutors have been investigating whether veteran NBA player Terry Rozier manipulated his performance as part of an illegal sports betting scheme. This is in connection to the same people that were associated with Jontay Porter, who got caught up in a gambling scheme. Jontay Porter was subsequently banned from the NBA. Authorities, the Journal reports, believe that some of the people who arranged for Porter to fix his performance in 2 games last season had inside information that prompted them to bet large sums of money against Rozier a year earlier. This traces back to Rozier when he was playing for the Charlotte Hornets. Now, I got a statement from the NBA spokesman Mike Bass. He says, in March 2023, the NBA was alerted to unusual betting activity related to Terry Rozier's performance in a game between Charlotte and New Orleans. The league conducted an investigation and did not find a violation of NBA rules. We are now aware of an investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York relating to this matter and have been cooperating with that investigation. So we're back on this Ferris wheel. Serious accusations being leveled against Terry Rozier, who is a much more notable player than Jontay Porter was. From what you've read about this and what you've kind of digested, what do you make of this news?
A couple different areas. So first of all, I completely believe the NBA did a thorough investigation. The NBA just doesn't have the tools at its disposal. The federal government does. I mean, they can't issue subpoenas. They can't tap phones if they get a warrant. They can't, go bust in and if they have a warrant, go through paperwork and things like that. They can't threaten lower level people who are involved in this gambling ring with more or less prison time if they give up people above them. So all of those tactics that we know about, I mean, clearly from watching TV, but also from real life, the NBA can't do all of that. So this is a different investigation than the NBA held. And look, obviously something fishy happened because one of the things that was in the Wall Street Journal story is that some of these online gambling sites actually shut down the bets on Terry Rozier before the game even started because so much money was coming in on this random game. Obviously, Terry's a known player, but a random player out of the 400 that night playing, for a game that didn't seem to matter toward the end of the season. And that was suspicious enough that people shut some of the sites just didn't take bets on Terry that night. So clearly something fishy happened. The question is, was Terry involved, right? We know the gambling ring exists because we've already seen it be taken down in relation to Jontay Porter. Did he tip someone off that, hey, my foot hurts? He left the game, I think, right around the end of the first quarter.
Mark, yeah.
Right? And then that's sort of what upset people so much is that people bet on him to score a certain number of points or assists or whatever it was. And obviously his stats were completely different because he didn't play the rest of that game. Now, he didn't play the rest of that game or the rest of the season. It wasn't that much longer in the season, but it was enough that it's a little hard to believe that the Hornets would go along with a fake injury for the entire rest of the season if it wasn't real. So then the question is, the other way Rozier could have been involved, if he wasn't faking the injury just to play less and then manipulate the score, was did he tell someone in this gambling ring, hey, my foot hurts, I don't even know if I'm going to play tonight or make it through. They're saying this could be serious. I'd take the under on me if I were you, like if that conversation happened. Or is it as simple as someone in the organization who knew he was having foot problems said to a relative, oh man, Terry Rozier, I got to work on his foot today because, he's having so many problems. Was there a cousin or someone or a friend at Terry Rozier's house while he was getting at-home treatment who then went and told someone, oh, hey, by the way, he's having foot problems. I'd take the under on him tonight. So Rozier the NBA could be correct that Rozier is not involved at all and still something fishy happened. There is a question though, was he involved?
It's complicated. There's a lot of ways to look at it. And I believe the NBA did a thorough investigation because when I talked to Adam Silver before the start of the season, one of the questions I asked him was like, how much does, I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but like, how much does this keep you up at night?
Yeah.
Like the Jonte Porter situation. And he said to the effect of, it's what worries me the most.
Right.
Because, the integrity of the game is all it has. And I thought at the time, as bad as it was that the Jonte Porter situation happened, it was in a weird way like the best case scenario for the NBA because it affected a two-way guy that wasn't all that involved in the games and probably didn't ultimately influence the outcome of games. Like he was the perfect guy.
And let's be honest, didn't play on the Knicks or Lakers or one
Right.
of these
Toronto
Celtics.
Raptors. And, he's a perfect guy to make an example of. Terry Rozier's a different ballgame. He's not a perennial all-star, but he is he was a major player for the Charlotte Hornets that year. He has been a key part of the Miami Heat rotation. If this turns out to be Jonte Porter-esque, it's a catastrophe. I don't know what else you look at. Like it is a complete disaster for the NBA. And it makes me wonder, like, how many more of these guys are kind of out there? Like we didn't know the NBA investigated Terry Rozier.
No.
Like how many more guys are they investigating? Like what does their investigation arm, look like with this stuff? Like I just, if it turns, and we don't know what the case is. The NBA says they investigated. The government says something different. They said that this case is still open. But if it turns out to be anything close to Jonte Porter, it's not quite Tim Donaghy, but it's close. Like it's along those lines. Like it's much closer to Tim Donaghy than it is to Jonte Porter.
And look, it depends on what degree it was even with Terry Rozier. It could be nothing. Again, it could be that someone told someone that's not even related to him. It could be someone else in the organization. It could be a friend or someone telling someone, and that friend goes and tells people involved in gambling. So he could have had nothing to do with this. Or he could have had something to do with this just by tipping off information. That's one of the things Jonte Porter was nailed for. Jonte Porter also bet on games himself, including his own team, using privileged information and bet on them to lose, just in case you were keeping track at home.
And there were some videos of his horrific play during some of those games that were circulating. It's like, okay, be more subtle.
So I think in terms of the lasting effect, in terms of the integrity of the league, we kind of have to see, was Terry involved at all? And if he was, in what way? If it is as serious as what Jonte Porter was doing, sorry, all of the Porters, Murrays, Denver tie, exactly. You see where my brain was. Obviously that's a whole different scenario. I think that the NBA investigation, while again, I think they were as thorough as it's possible to be. I absolutely believe that. I've heard Adam say something similar. I know how they feel about this stuff, but they are only able to do certain things. And the federal government and the Southern District of New York and all of the stuff is able to do such a wider variety of investigating. The NBA just doesn't have access to those tools. We could find a very different result from the federal investigation, and that still won't be the NBA's fault in terms of, they were trying to cover it up. But the truth is, it could be a very different result.
Yeah, I don't want to put the cart before the horse because we don't know what the outcome of this investigation is. But if there's even a whiff of truth to it, if there was even a head fake from Terry Rozier to anybody about something that could impact the game, doesn't the NBA have to impose the exact same penalty? Like, doesn't the NBA have to have an absolute zero tolerance policy? Because this is a potential nightmare. I mean, there are 500-ish players in the NBA, all playing an 82-game season. Like, unless you make the punishment the version of a basketball death penalty, you're already going to risk it no matter what. There's always going to be a guy or two out there that, for whatever reason, might get involved in stuff like this. But unless you impose the strictest of punishment, I don't know what else you can do to try to wave guys off from this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question. I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well, my point is, like, it doesn't have to be like what Porter did was pretty egregious. What we learned after the fact, like, he was out there, screwing around. But even if it's like,
I agree,
2% of what Porter did, it has to still be the same penalty.
No, 100%. It has to be. It has to be. That's it. You are never playing in the NBA again. Because imagine if Terry Rozier, even in a minor way, was involved in this, and then he's out on the court next year, and then people are going to be like, well, what about the games he's in? And just sort of the unfurling speculation would be too much for the league to sustain. So I don't think there's any question. If you've done anything even close to, as you say, a nod, then you're out. And that has to be the punishment. Otherwise, there's no way to control it.
What does Miami do in this situation?
Well, Miami's having a rough month, man.
Very rough month. This wasn't even their fault. This wasn't under their umbrella. I mean, this was pre.
I know, but they're still.
But if you're, I mean, the NBA doesn't really have the old NFL commissioner's exempt list, but this feels like, I don't know that you can play Rozier right now while this is ongoing.
I think they kind of have to, given everything else that's going on with that team. And B, from an NBA perspective, he's been cleared from an NBA perspective.
Yeah.
So even though, again, I think the federal government has different tools and could come with a different result to their investigation, from an NBA perspective, I think you keep playing him. I mean, the league has said he didn't do anything wrong in their eyes. They don't have a ton of flexibility with what else is going on in that town and that team right now. Yeah. And I would keep playing him. And by the way, he could have done nothing wrong. Yeah. There are other ways, information about his foot, which is what knocked him out, not just for that game, but for the entire rest of the season. And again, late in the season, they shut him down. But again, clearly this was real. It's not just like a fake foot injury that he got out of that night and then he shows up on the court the next day, okay, I'm ready to go. This was a real thing. And there are a lot of people in an organization who have access to information about how bad that injury is and its likelihood to affect a game that night. So it is entirely possible that Rozier had nothing to do with it. And since that is, and we supposedly live in a presumed innocent country, I think you let him play. How could you not, really?
Yeah, I mean, but in the NFL, sometimes, and again, we're comparing apples to oranges in a way, but if there's a domestic violence incident or something.
But that's a different thing. You have evidence of, hey, this woman is battered. She showed up at the hospital. He was in the room. You can sit there and say, oh, well, she did this first, or, oh, this was the circumstances different than it looks.
It's hard not knowing what the government knows at this point.
But without any evidence to look at.
They got to hope that they speed through this, that they either, come up with some indictments, arrests, whatever it may be, or say, we got nothing. Yeah. Because this is going to hang over him for a long
100%.
time. It's impossible to make a transition from that, but I'm going to make my best effort and turn to De'Aaron Fox, who is involved in a much lesser drama of his own. On Monday, it was widely reported that the Sacramento Kings intended to field trade offers for former All-Star point guard De'Aaron Fox. This is in the aftermath of Fox informing the team that he would not be signing a contract extension. He's got a contract that runs through 2026. This is surprising, though it can't really be considered shocking, I would say, because Fox has turned down multiple extensions in the past. But this does put the Kings in a very difficult spot. Your reaction to the de facto trade request by De'Aaron Fox?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he has every right not to want to sign another contract. He is an adult. We all get to pick where we work. It's still a little shaky that these guys don't get to pick where they work coming out of college, even though the rest of us do. But even if you give them that grace period of saying, hey, a league has to work, that there's a distribution of talent, once that talent reaches an age he is, I believe he's 27.
27, yeah.
He's allowed to decide where he wants to live and what city he wants to live in and what kind of team he wants to be on. And the Sacramento Kings have not been what we call the most functional franchise in league history. And yes, there's been some steadying over recent years from, the absolute craziness it was maybe 5 to 7 years ago. But come on, if you are looking to be a serious player and win a championship, it is easy to lose confidence in that organization and want to go somewhere else. And he's allowed to want to do that. It's interesting to me that his top destination is San Antonio. You know me, I'm all in on Wemby. I feel like, anybody should want to play with him no matter where he's playing. And the fact that also De'Aaron's from Texas and it wouldn't be such a stretch for him to want to be there at all. Whoever it is who gets in as the guard that works with Wemby, that's it. They're set.
It's a race.
For the rest of their career.
It's a race for that slot.
Right?
The Spurs are going to get somebody of all-star, all-NBA caliber to play next to Victor Wembanyama. And if I'm De'Aaron Fox and I'm looking at the next 5 years, that would be where I'd want to go.
Sure.
Wind up. I agree with you 100%. I think De'Aaron Fox is handling this in the best way possible. He's not signing an extension and then asking out, which drives people crazy. He's not demanding a trade and then pulling a Jimmy Butler, who we're going to get to in a minute, and screwing things up. He's averaging 25 per game. He's playing at a level that will, should earn him consideration for an all-star spot. Probably not going to get it, but he's earning that consideration. In a way, he's doing the Kings a huge favor here.
Of course.
He's telling them, hey, you can do whatever you want. I will play for you at this level for the next year and a half, if that's what you want. But I'm not signing your extension. So if you want to try to get something for me, now is the time. And he's made it clear, and look, the Kings don't have to trade him to San Antonio, but that's where he ultimately wants to be. I think he's done exactly the right thing. And you know what? If you're Sacramento, if you're looking for reasons why he's doing this, look yourself in the mirror.
That's what I'm saying.
48-win team less than 2 years ago. 3rd seed in the Western Conference.
Yep.
Light the beam. Everybody is excited. All these guys. Sabonis is there. Fox is there.
First
Keegan
time
Murray
in the
is there.
playoffs in how
First
many
time in the
years?
playoffs in 16 years. Kevin Huerter looks like a great sniper for postseason play. They have not built on that. There was one thing that team needed: a defensive stopper at the wing position, and they haven't got him. They're like, to me, they're like the Boston Red Sox of the West Coast, where they're in on all these guys. They're in on, like, we're in on Pascal Siakam. We're in on OG Anunoby. We're in on all these defensive-minded wings that are going to help our team. Your team, in the entire De'Aaron Fox era, and I looked this up, has never finished above, like, the middle of the pack in defensive efficiency. More often than not, they're somewhere in the 20s.
That's crazy.
Like, you got enough offense. You got enough firepower. You got to go out there and get a 3-and-D wing player. Their response was to go get DeMar DeRozan. And I love DeMar DeRozan, and he's been exactly what he's always been with Sacramento. A good mid-range shooter, a good fourth-quarter player, but he's not a 3-and-D guy. He's not what that team needed. So if I'm De'Aaron Fox, and since that moment, where the pinnacle moment, where they pushed Golden State to 7 games in the first round of the 23 playoffs, everything has been a little bit of regression. Last year, they only were a couple wins off their pace before, but they still didn't get into the playoffs. This year, they start 13-19. For some reason, people were blaming him for the Mike Brown fire, which I never really understood. Like, using one video, like one conversation they were having. Social media sucks. Like, everything has kind of gone downhill for him over the last year and a half. So, like, what do you expect? Like, do you expect your young star at 27 to be looking at, like, San Antonio, Houston, where he's from, maybe even Miami, if they get their act together, and saying, like, that's not a better solution for me? No. The Kings have no one to blame for them but themselves for the situation.
And by the way, what's the opposite of the Sacramento Kings in terms of organizational
San
steadiness?
Antonio, yes.
Right? The right people in the right place, making competent, rational decisions. It is literally at the other end of the spectrum. So I understand that he might be craving, in addition to the Wemby factor, which would be enough, he might be craving some of that too. And by the way, as we look at potential destinations for him, yes, they could trade him now before the deadline if they get enough of a package. And I always think it's smart of teams to at least dangle a guy out there, because there is a little more desperation in the middle of the season for teams that aren't doing well, who know they have championship expectations, and you have general managers who fear they will lose their jobs at the end of the year. So they're willing to make more of an all-in trade, screw the future type of situation. If it doesn't work out, they won't be there anyway. So I think it's smart to dangle him now, but if they don't get a good offer, a good enough deal, they can still do it this summer.
With this guy is like the two teams that I think are the most likely to be competitive, they have no such issues. Like San Antonio is in no rush. Victor Wembanyama just became legal to drink. Like, Houston has been telling anyone that will listen,
we're not messing
they're
with
not doing
anything
anything
right now
with this group right now. Like, maybe if Devin Booker became available, they might change that too.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's all this. So, like, it's
just to see. Take it out for a test drive, see what offers you get, gives you information for the summer. Maybe he'll be traded in the next week or so, but also
I doubt it, though.
Maybe it'll be this summer.
Like, if you're San Antonio, like, what's your motivation?
There's no need to do it right now.
Like, this is the honeymoon year. Like, let's get to 500. Let's get Wembanyama in a play-in game. Like, let's do that. We've got Chris Paul there, Harrison Barnes. Let's just learn more. Let's get a little bit better. And then in the offseason, when you've got some more time to think about this, not the 8 days or 9 days or whatever it's going to be before that trade deadline. And same thing with Houston. Like, Houston, maybe they get to the playoffs, they get beat in the second round. They realize, like, Jalen Green's not the guy, or they, have some flexibility with Fred VanVleet's contract and some of the Suns' capital that they've got ownership over for the next couple of years. Like, this is the kind of thing that I think needs to be sorted out in the offseason.
Let me ask you an interesting question about San Antonio, because as you said, it's going to be a little bit of a race to see who gets to be his partner on the court for the next however many years. I mean, you're basically making room in your safe deposit box for rings, as far as I'm concerned.
You've been driving the Wemby's to be the greatest player of all time.
I am
sooner rather than later.
By the way, I'm not saying he will be the
Our
greatest
best player
player
in
of
the
time,
NBA. Like,
but
yeah.
I will say that we might be having a different, all this argument over LeBron and Jordan and Kareem and whatever, we might be 20 years from now having a different conversation.
Oh, yeah.
I
can agree with that.
That being said, I do think I can say now that barring a major injury, I feel he will be one of the top 10 players of all time because his gifts. I know we can disagree, and then you know what?
No, we agree.
Oh,
on
we
that.
agree.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's hard to say otherwise. I agree with that one. I actually think it's kind of funny that like the AD interview with Shams, like where AD seemed like really annoyed at these like the narrative of Wemby being the like it's not the same thing as Rudy. Like Rudy sometimes maybe even though Rudy was a walking top five defense, like Wembanyama is a better defensive player than Rudy. Like he probably should have won it last year.
Yes,
but I think as a rookie,
he just had a rough couple months start.
Yeah, I think people could have given him as a rookie, and Rudy was Rudy, and like, but I think from now until whenever, if he gets over that 65 game threshold, he's winning that award.
I mean, Anthony Davis, unfortunately, I think his window has passed unless there's a Wemby injury year. But beyond that, beyond the race to see who's going to be his playing partner, as we say, what do you think in terms of San Antonio having to keep him happy and engaged? Because everything we've heard about him since he was in France before he was drafted is that he is hyper competitive and that he is not good at losing and that he gets frustrated easily by losing. And that last season was really hard for him, according to accounts of people around him, and that sustained losing over a period of time while they judge and look and say, okay, we're waiting for the perfect guy to come along to be that point guard. How long do you think, what's their window to get that done to make sure that one of the best players potentially ever does a Tim Duncan, does a David Robinson, and stays in San Antonio the rest of his career?
I think they've got a decent sized runway.
I mean, they've got the 7 years, or I guess, well, I don't know how much money he feels like he needs to take for the second max.
I think like, he and I talked about this in the preseason when I went down there. And he gets it. Like I hate using the word process, but he gets the process. And I think fundamentally what's important for San Antonio is that even if it's incremental improvements to the roster, you're still making improvements.
Right.
They did that this year. I mean, CP, good addition.
100%.
Harrison Barnes has been Harrison Barnes is good on the floor.
Yeah.
But what Pop told me in the preseason was like, we consider Harrison Barnes one of the great practice players. Like, and whatever his habits are in practice, I'm sure Wembanyama is gaining something from that.
Yep.
So, as long as they, this summer, maybe they don't have to take the big swing, get De'Aaron Fox. Maybe you say, look, I've got Stephen Castle. He's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Maybe he's the guy we're going to play next to him. But as long as they take another step forward and push this team closer to a higher level, like if they, a 500 season, if they can get there, is awesome.
No, 100%.
Is awesome.
I'm not saying they have to win next year, and they do have runway, et cetera. But I'm just curious: is it a 5-year window? Is it a 3-year window? Like, what do you, as sitting here today, what would you say is their window to be a competitive, in the mix playoff?
5
team?
years to compete for
a
the Western
championship.
Conference championship. I would say,
I think it's shorter. I think it's 5 years to compete for an NBA title.
Yeah, okay, I could see that because you look year 3, maybe they're getting deeper into the playoffs.
Yeah.
Year 4, he's just a terror on both ends of the floor. Yeah, I mean 4 or 5 years to compete for a championship, and I think they can do it. They're obviously smart organizationally. They've got the draft capital. They've got tradable players on there, and they're not wed to really anybody outside of Wemby and Castle.
Yeah,
you can trade Keldon Johnson, trade Devin Vassell. Like there's just it's a good time to be a San Antonio Spurs fan. And to bring it all full circle, like I don't blame De'Aaron Fox. Like he's a Texas guy looking down there going, hey, I want to be his running mate. I love Texas. And yeah, I'm forking over some money maybe with the Supermax and the possibility he could get it. Hey, state income tax in Texas.
Yeah, 0.
You can make some money off of that.
Do you get a ring if you're like the water boy or water girl? Because in a few years, I might consider, I have such faith in Wembanyama, maybe I go do that job for a few years just to get a ring myself.
I can tell you as a former ball boy, you do get a ring. Now, I didn't because I was part of the ML Carr, D. Brown, David Wesley years in Boston. But my brother has a ring. Has 2 rings, actually. From his time. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. It's nice to...
I didn't know you were related to such NBA royalty.
Royalty. I don't know where those rings are, but they're somewhere in his house. We actually made it to the third topic before talking about Jimmy Butler. But here we are again because...
Look at us.
We are
Look at us.
In the middle of is this his third suspension, second, third, whatever it is. Second suspension that's going to take him all the way up until the February 6th trade deadline. Sam Amick and I talked about this earlier in the week. It does seem to be perceived league-wide that the cost for Jimmy Butler has gone down, that they've kind of slashed prices in the aftermath of this last suspension to the point where other teams are kind of getting back in. I really believed, and I said this earlier in the week, that if you had asked me on Friday or Saturday if Jimmy Butler would still be in Miami, I kind of leaned towards yes, because I just didn't think anyone could meet the asking price. They wanted top-tier young talent, they wanted draft capital, and they wanted no contracts that go beyond 2026. I think they still want no contracts that go beyond 2026. So sorry, Suns fans. This does not mean Bradley Beal is back in the mix.
Yes.
But I do think the asking price has come down to the point where I think there are teams out there, whether it's Golden State, Memphis, maybe Milwaukee, that are probably looking at Jimmy Butler and saying, even if we don't get him to sign, if we're not going to sign an extension, even if he walks at the end of the year, it might be worth it for us to take a swing on this thing. So what do you think of this idea that Miami is cutting the price for Butler, and is it worth it for a team to take a swing on what could potentially be a rental?
I just think everyone in this situation has to keep in mind what you would be trading for, or what you are trading him for if you're Miami, what you get back for him, because he is not the Jimmy Butler he was when Miami acquired him. And by the way, if he walks out the door and they don't get a ton back, that would have still been a good decision, because it was 2-3 conference finals, one finals appearance. I mean, especially in a post-LeBron world where that franchise internally, not in terms of the public sphere, but took a little bit of a hit from the way LeBron left them, to be able to so quickly, in NBA terms, rebound and have those really high-profile appearances, have that Heat culture sort of underscored and all of that stuff. That's a value. So no matter how this ends, if I'm the Heat, I would have still made the decision, 6 years ago or whatever it was. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But this isn't 6 years ago, right? So I looked up some stats here. Jimmy has averaged in his entire time with Miami, including the beginning, 58 games a year during his career there. And by the way, he's 35. That number is likely only to go down in the coming years. So that is what you are acquiring him, is that. And by the way, you want him for the playoffs. You want playoff Jimmy. What if he's hurt during the playoffs, right?
Which has been part of playoff Jimmy
has been
the last couple of
part
years.
of the problem, right? So you can't be in like, it doesn't matter how many games he plays. In the playoffs, he might not be there. So you have to keep that in mind. He's 35 years old. He's going to be 36 next year, when if he doesn't touch any contract stuff, if no one gives him an extension, he can just say, I'd still like another $50 million, right? So you're acquiring that too. There's a lot of people talking about, maybe you just treat him as a rental. You don't give him the extension. You're on the hook for $50 million next year for a guy who will be 36 years old, averaging at best, we think, 58 games and might not be there for the playoffs. So I think the idea of Jimmy Butler and the well-earned reputation he's built over these years is somehow playing a little bit more in the public sphere as what he's, quote, worth than in general managers' offices around the league, because they know what they'd be trading for. And by the way, add into the fact that he obviously is such a locker room problem if he gets dissatisfied at all, and that he has felt underpaid his entire career, and that this issue with Miami started over money. I mean, that's all it was about, was money at the beginning. And now, of course, it's mushroomed into other things. But this was about money and feeling like he wasn't going to get paid enough.
It's still about money. I think if they offered him $113 million right now.
But here's the thing. Jimmy has made more than $400 million in his career just on the court. So I added up all his salary just on the court. And then, of course, endorsements. Maybe even, I don't know if they doubled, but, the coffee, clearly. But, the shoe con, all the stuff, right? Yeah. He's been a very endorsable guy.
He's easily at $500 million.
Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's worth blowing up your relationship with your team and also your reputation in the NBA if you've already got that kind of money in the bank. But a guy who would do that, I would be reluctant to trade for, given all of those other factors. And I'm not surprised that a lot of other people are too. And by the way, there was an athletic report that in San Francisco, that's still where they play, the Golden State Warriors, who are sort of, in a lot of people's mind, a fit destination in terms of how he would work on the court, they don't seem interested. And that, a lot of it comes from, Yahoo Sports reported that was partly from Steph and Steve Kerr not thinking that he would be a good fit in the locker room. The culture of the Warriors has been such a key, important part of how that team has run. And I think that Steph and Steve both feel like, great, we'd love to win another title, but only one team wins the title every year. And so what we really want to do is stay competitive, stay this being a joyful, fun place to play basketball. And man, hopefully we can win it one of these future years. They've already got Draymond, who sometimes threatens that. I just don't see them adding
And
Jimmy.
that kind of fits what they were saying a couple of weeks ago that we talked about, like this, they don't want to see the team make a move that will blow it up for the future, that won't move the needle far enough.
Don't you think that it was the Butler talk that made Steph and
Yeah,
Draymond come out and say
it?
it? Because it was that week that he's a really good fit in Golden State. Look at what he could do on the court with Steph and Draymond and et cetera. And it did not surprise me at all.
Golden State. Then you put 2 non-shooters out there on the floor. Like, that's a tough one.
I'm not saying he is. I'm just saying that was definitely the narrative. Golden State, that's the best spot for him. That's the front runner. And it did not surprise me at all to have Steph and Draymond, who are 2 of the more competitive guys we have seen come through this league, sit there and say, oh, we don't want to make a trade that might hurt the future of this team when we're not here. That's a very highly unusual thing for star players to come out and say publicly in what seemed like a coordinated effort. To me, it had to be partly in response to the Butler talk. And I don't see them making that trade. And which team do you think?
I'm trying to talk myself into Memphis. I'm really trying. Because I don't think Memphis is a championship contender right now. And I think Butler fits into their team. They're a better 3-point shooting team than I thought they were going to be coming into this year. Luke Kennard's leading the NBA in threes. Jalen Wells came out of nowhere. Nobody expected him to do that. And a lot of their guys.
And by the way, Jaren continues to just elevate. And now you've got 2 really bona fide stars with him and John.
Yeah, they've got a lot of guys that are mid-volume 3-point shooters and that are shooting mid to high 30s from 3-point range, which is good. So if you're plugging Jimmy Butler in there, I'm less concerned about the spacing. It's still kind of a problem with John Morant, who has not been great this year. He's shooting like 30% from 3. So that's still, I think Ja can get his numbers a little bit higher. I just think because Jimmy Butler is still a high-level defensive guy, and that's something they've been looking for. They tried to make a play on Dorian Finney-Smith. I'm trying to talk myself into Memphis. Now, I don't believe Jimmy Butler wants to go to Memphis. I've been reporting this for a while now. But if you're the Grizzlies, and you're kind of right there, right? Like where you're the 3 seed in the West, but most people believe if you get into a conference final situation against Oklahoma City, you're going to get clobbered. Does Jimmy Butler make a difference there? Maybe. And look, maybe I actually am of the opinion that Jimmy might like to play in Memphis. Like maybe he doesn't want to live in Tennessee. Maybe he'd rather live in Southern California or Phoenix or wherever. But like he might like the situation. And if he does, I don't think the Grizzlies would mind giving him like 1 extra year on the contract. Maybe not 2, but like 1 more year to kind of continue to build this contender around Jaren Jackson. You look at me like I'm crazy. You're not buying it.
I'm not buying it because I'm not sure I'm buying it for any team. Yes, Memphis has been more in the discussion lately, and I think everything you're saying is true. But to me, it is not just about the cost of what you'd have to give up to get him, and maybe the price tag has gone down, et cetera. It is what you are risking of your current number 3 seeded team with a core of players you just rattled off are good, what you are risking if you get him. Because Jimmy, if he wanted to be traded from Miami, had all of the incentive in the world to be fabulous the last couple months, right? To be a team guy, to have the right attitude, to play through injuries, to show up, increase his trade value, increase the number of teams who wanted him, and get out of town. If that is what he wanted because he wasn't going to get this extension, he had every single personal selfish incentive to do that. Instead, not only has it been such a problem for management, I talked to guys in that locker room, and to say they have had it is an understatement because he has disrespected them so much. The way he's been in and out of, last minute I'm not playing, the way he's been acting toward people in their locker room, and I mean staff or other people like that. And then the stunt with making them wait hours on the tarmac to even show up. Do you think that, again, I haven't spoken to Bam Adebayo about this, so I am speculating. I want to make this clear. But if you are Bam Adebayo, who is of this level of a player that he is, and some guy on your team who isn't even contributing right now makes you wait for hours on the tarmac, how do you feel about that? Wow. And by the way, he could cost you $50 million. Forget the extension. He could cost you $50 million next season to play 50, 55 games and maybe not be there for the playoffs and maybe decide.
So what, like, let me
he's taking the money, but he's going to be a malcontent there too.
But like, so, you know, we started this with I guess the premise I was making that the, TJ Maxx slashing of prices there has made him more appealing. It doesn't sound like you think that's
No.
like, if it's not Golden State, if it's not Memphis, if it can't be Phoenix unless we get real creative and something that I don't think is going to happens, which is like Bradley Beal saying, like, I'll go play for Chicago, for example. Like, what is he? Do you think February 7th, he's still on the Miami Heat roster?
Here's what I think. There have historically been a handful of teams who we feel have suspect front offices who make rash and sort of ill-informed decisions, right? I would say that Phoenix getting themselves into this situation was not
top of the list. Yeah.
Not what one would do. We just talked about Sacramento, who has a history of rash and odd decisions. So there are a couple franchises around the NBA, and I'm not pointing to those two in particular in this case, but I'm just saying there's always a few, right, who would take sort of a risk you should take, who are doing something to stir up the pot and get something going without really looking at what they are going to get when that guy gets there.
Yeah.
So there's always someone out there.
I don't know who it
but
is.
if I'm if I'm 27 of the teams in the league who at this point, I mean, the NBA has progressed that there are less of those franchises. There are fewer of those franchises that are run by the seat of their pants. There are 25, 27 teams in the league that aren't like that. I don't see why you would trade for him. I just don't. Not at this age, not with the amount of money he's owed, and not with his potential to blow up your team. Because if $400 million in career earnings, and to your point, what, twice that? Even if it's just $300 million more in endorsements, if that's not enough for you, that you are willing to tank your reputation, your trade value, how people see you as a teammate and in the league. I mean, Jimmy Butler, I don't think is ever going to be seen the same way after this series of stunts. If you're willing to trash all of that for a little more money when you already have that, anyone who trades for him has to believe he's going to do the same thing.
Yeah, which he's done at previous spots along the way. Not his first rodeo with this type of stuff. And to put a button in the Memphis stuff too, he's not a round peg, round hole fit either, because like one of the things that's made them different this year is they play fast, right? They're number one, I think, in the league in pace. They were middle of the pack last year. Like, Jimmy Butler doesn't help that. Like, he's not speeding the game up for this team. So I don't know. I mean, I guess you're kind of talking me into the idea that he could still be on the Heat roster come February 7th, which creates a whole different world of problems. Like, what do you do with him then?
Well, can I ask you, I know we need to move on because God knows, but I do want to ask you a question since you are much more front office savvy than I am. Part of the reason to suspend him, as they have, instead of just saying, go away, we'll call you when we have a deal for you, is that you still have to pay him.
Yeah.
If you go away and we'll call you when you have a deal for you. If you suspend him, you do not have to pay him.
Right.
And I think regardless of the cap hit, it galls Mickey Arison and Pat Riley and that front office to be paying him for these antics. So that is why, even with the Players Association, waving their hands, why they have done it. Can that trigger be A, quicker, and B, longer? So that they could say, great, if we have to keep him on the roster, nobody else wants him, we can't get a deal for him. Can they say, great, he's suspended for the month. And if he comes back and he still pulls the same crap, he's suspended for the rest of the season. And
just keep waiting for him to walk out of shoot arounds and practices.
Well, no, but
I mean, I guess.
Here's the thing. When there's work stoppages, which I have covered pretty extensively, both in the NFL and the NBA, the power is always ultimately on the owner's side because athletes have a ticking clock. If owners have to wait out 3 years of a work stoppage, they can just pick right back up and make money, and in a lot of cases actually save money by not fielding these teams. Athletes lose their prime years. And by the way, if Jimmy Butler is suspended for the better part of the next 2 years, he's never playing in the NBA again.
No.
So at some point, do the Heat, if they are stuck with him, do they say, great, you are on a running suspension until you come and show up and contribute to this team. And if you want to waste these last years and not get paid anything, go ahead. And that to me is where, when we say who has the power in this relationship, and if the deadline passes and they can't work out a deal for him, I think I don't think it's as clear as some people seem to, that Jimmy has all the power and he can continue to screw their team and they've got to get rid of him and no matter what it costs. I think the Heat have some power too. And Jimmy has both money, which we now know is very important to him, and time and the rest of his career to lose. The stakes for him are also pretty serious here. And I think that's something to just take into this consideration. How long, you know better than me, how long can they do it for?
I mean, if any team has the backbone to do it, it's probably Miami because you have a coach and a president that have no fear, right? Like they are locked in. They are two of the best at their respective positions, and they are largely in lockstep with every decision that's made internally. It could lead to some wild scenarios where, February 7th, Butler comes back. Eric Spoelstra says you're still coming off the bench after Haywood Highsmith, and he leaves again, and then we're back where they started up. I do, and you sound like you've done more reporting on this than I have. Like, watching them play that Orlando game, like you can't bring them back after that. Like Orlando's a good team, and they beat them in overtime. Like despite all the drama, Ware played well, in that starting spot. Jovic playing like this has got to be the team they have moving forward, and it's going to be fast. It's going to be an interesting 10 days with this.
I'm just wondering if there's a different way to achieve this is the team they have going forward besides trading him. If they can't get something, I mean, they're obviously trying, but if they can't get something done, and is the switch for Jimmy, you may never play in the NBA again if you continue this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess keep suspending him, and look, you're going to face a lawsuit. You're going to face the players union pushing back, but like that's what you got to do because you got to look out for the long-term health of your team as well. I'm sure they've got lawyers over there figuring this stuff. They're thinking about what's the next step or how do we get out of paying, I'm sure in his contract, like if you withhold services, does your player option all of a sudden become, we don't know all the details of that contract. It'll be fascinating.
This is my other side of the coin that I just don't think people are talking about.
I appreciate the other side of the coin on that one. I hadn't looked at it too far on that side. Let's finish with this last thing here. Our friend Adam Silver was on the Dan Patrick show this week. Dan caught him probably a day too early. If he had got him a day later, he might have had
some good stuff. But yes, to your point,
Rozier stuff.
Yes.
Dan was asking Adam about changing the game. This has been a popular topic, since really the mid-season tournament when Adam talked extensively about the issues that they see.
Since the ratings dropped 30% at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, that too. And when I was in Vegas too, and like when just talking to him and hearing his issues with the game. One thing he brought up was the possibility of changing the game from 4 12-minute quarters to 4 10-minute quarters, which fits in with the uniform FIBA style, college style that exists. And Adam made the point that we're the only basketball league in the world that plays 48 minutes. My instinct reaction is hell no. Not that I don't like the idea, but it changed the game. Like the records become less meaningful. Like you almost have to like create a new set of record books for a league before the 40-minute game and the league after before the 48-minute game and after. Where do you stand on this idea? Which Adam will admit is a little pie in the sky, but it does sound like he's interested in it. And as Dan pointed out, if you, the commissioner, are into this, then others are going to have to get into it too.
I'm actually someone who, like you, has covered the league for a very long time, decades. So if someone's going to be a traditionalist, it would be us. It sounds like you are taking that position. We heard several coaches take that position in the last day or two since he said it. I have to say, from my perspective, even after being a traditionalist in some ways, I think it's an idea worth discussing because I do think we know for a fact attention spans have gotten shorter. Viewer habits for how kids today, quote unquote, consume. And by the way, it's not just kids. I have adult friends in an advanced age, let's say, who watch television shows by checking their social media feed and watching it in 3-minute increments on TikTok. And then they watch the next 3 minutes later in the afternoon. And then they're across their feed, the algorithm sees they've watched the first 6 minutes. So then it'll feed them the next one. And these are people in their 40s. I mean, think about what people in their teens and 20s are doing. If you don't face that reality, the other sport you have covered for such a long time is not as popular as it used to be, and you could possibly end up in a similar boat. It will take a while, but I think that guys like Tom Thibodeau and Michael Malone, who were the most visible, sort of saying, that's a dumb idea, I hope we don't do it. Michael Malone went so far as to say, I hope we don't become Barnum and Bailey's, to please people, which, by the way, I appreciate that he thinks that most people out there will get that reference. I'm not sure anyone under 25 will.
Hey, we all saw The Greatest Showman.
Well, there you go. Barnum and Bailey, a circus, first of all, that was, of course, doing anything to attract people. That's what he was saying. Michael Malone makes $12 million a year. And if you want those big TV contracts to continue, instead of this one that they just got being the last big payout they ever get, you better prove over the course of that contract that you can retain viewers. And they have to think that way. And as for the record books, I would just leave with this. At the beginning of the NBA era, just like the NHL, there were 6 teams and guys were doing, working at different jobs while they still play. I mean, this game has changed.
You're right.
The 3-point line has changed and made records mean different things than they used to. There are eras in a sport that has been fortunate enough, a league that's been fortunate enough to be around for 75, 76 years. There will be changes that make records before and after, and sort of we just have to make that point. Oh, that was before this. Wilt was before this, XXY before this. If we have to say that another time for another set of records, I don't think it's going to be so different than what we say now.
You've done a great job in the show of talking me into things here. And you're kind of talking me into that as well. I do look, Adam's thing was we like that 2-hour sweet spot, right? For game length. I would start with starting a 7:30 game on time. That's a big thing. Like, you say you're going to start a game at 7:30. There's not a single game that starts before like 7:38. Like, so let's just whittle that 8 minutes down.
And let's talk about the fourth quarter where 2 minutes to go is often 20 minutes to go.
Yeah. I in other words, I think there are ways to get the game down to an optimal length without touching the 12-minute quarters. I would start with them, I guess, first. I think they're,
That's fair.
I think the 3-point line is something that somehow, some way needs to be addressed, whether it's a simple fix like allowing more physicality on the perimeter. I actually did Andrew Yang's podcast of all people recently, and Andrew Yang had this idea he pitched me on threes counting for 2.6. It's his big thing. He was dead serious about it. He's like, let's count threes.
I don't find that hard to believe considering some of his other ways he's solving problems.
He had some thoughts. It was an interesting conversation. But I'd start with the 3-point line. I'd start with that's changing the game a little bit. I'd start with getting a 7:30 start because games, look, games. I always figured out game starts at 7:30. It's probably over at 10:50. That's kind of the way it's been. You take that 8 minutes off, like you're talking 10:40 is still 2 hours. 10 minutes.
But you know why they don't start till 7:38?
Commercials, yeah, it's all.
It's the television contract. Yeah. And by the way, you have just had 3 television partners spend an incredible amount of money to still have those 8 minutes at the front of every game. So I guarantee you that's not changing.
All right, well, 10-minute quarters it is then. That's what we've got to settle.
I'm not saying that's the best solution. I'm just saying that I understand why we've gotten here. And that, again, as you say, start times would definitely improve things, if they actually started on time. You can't do that. That option is actually off the table.
Yeah.
So you just have to narrow it down to the options that are on the table still, and that may be one of them.
All right, well, Adam Silver, if you're listening, we are sort of getting on board with your idea. Rachel, great stuff. Always glad to do this in person.
Yes, absolutely.